Hi, this is CJ. Welcome to Sweet on Your Lips, a flirty JiKook one-shot story. Jimin and Jungkook head out for a simple night under the stars, but between burnt marshmallows, teasing dares, and one sticky sweet kiss, the forest ends up hotter than they'd planned. You can find the written version of this and all my stories on my Patreon at patreon.com/cjmoon, and the original video version of this story as well as dozens more on my main channel at youtube.com/@cjmoonwrites. All links are also in the description of this video. If you're watching as well as listening, hit the CC button to turn on subtitles. YouTube will auto-translate as well as auto-dub the audio from English into the language of your choice. So, sit back, enjoy, and let's begin.
The forest welcomed them like an old friend. The canopy overhead swayed gently in the late afternoon breeze, scattering flecks of gold across the mossy floor. Jimin tilted his head back, smiling as he watched the sunlight pierce through the trees in slanted beams. The scent of pine needles and damp earth was thick in the air, and a creek whispered somewhere deeper in the woods. "This was a good idea," Jimin said softly, his voice carrying the contentment of someone already sinking into the rhythm of nature. Jungkook tightened his grip on the tent bag, slung over his shoulder, his bunny smile flashing. "Of course it was. Camping with me? The best idea you've ever had." Jimin snorted, bumping his shoulder into Jungkook's. "Confident, aren't we? Let's see if you can even set up the tent before night falls." "Excuse me? I was practically raised by pine trees." Jungkook shot back, all mock indignation. The absurdity of his response made Jimin giggle, just as he had hoped. His hair caught the sun in soft brown glints as he led them toward a clearing he'd picked out on the map earlier. Jimin let his eyes linger on Jungkook's back, the easy, athletic way he moved, the stretch of his t-shirt over his shoulders. It stirred something warm in his chest. Being out here, just the two of them, away from flashing lights and buzzing phones, managers and schedules, felt like a stolen gift. The clearing was perfect. Tall pines ringed the open space like sentries, their needles carpeting the ground in a soft green quilt. Late summer air hung cool and clean, threaded with the hum of cicadas. Jimin dropped his pack with dramatic relief. "It's so quiet. Almost too quiet." Jungkook set down the tent bag and unrolled the fabric with an expert flourish. "Don't worry. If a bear shows up, I'll protect you." "With what?" Jimin asked, raising a brow. "Your bare hands?" "Get it," he said, laughing at his own pun, but his eyes lingered when the younger flexed dramatically. "Exactly." Jungkook leaned in, voice a conspiratorial whisper. "These aren't just for photos." Jimin poked his side teasingly, pretending to be unimpressed even as heat rose to his cheeks. They worked in easy rhythm, passing poles, clipping lines, bickering about instructions, until the tent looked sturdy. Jungkook stepped back, hands on hips, looking absurdly proud. Jimin snapped a picture of him posing like a scout leader and set it as Jungkook's contact photo. "No," Jungkook said, lunging for the phone. "Yes," Jimin sang, slipping it into his pocket. "Perfect. I can't wait to show him Jun." Jungkook rolled his eyes, but let go for now. Jimin knew not to leave his phone unattended later, though. They unfurled sleeping bags inside, tossed their backpacks just inside the flap, and then wandered toward the sound of the creek. The path wound through ferns that brushed at their calves, the ground springy with centuries of needles and leaves. A pair of warblers hopped along a branch above them, scolding like nosy neighbors. "Look," Jimin whispered, pointing ahead. The creek cut a bright ribbon through the forest, water rushing glass clear over stones the color of smoke and bone. Jimin crouched to dip his fingers. It was cold enough to wake every nerve. Jungkook kicked off his shoes and waded in up to his ankles, splashing noisily. "You're going to fall," Jimin said, both warning and prophecy. Jungkook's grin tilted. "Catch me," as if Jimin would ever not. Jimin rolled his eyes and waded in too, the icy water slapping at his skin. They skipped flat stones, the way kids do, and the flat thunk of each skip echoed between trees. Jungkook found a heart-shaped rock and handed it to Jimin with comic solemnity. Jimin slipped it into his pocket like a secret talisman, a charm to keep this moment protected in their hearts. They followed the creek upstream, then veered onto a deer path that climbed toward a ridge. They hadn't meant to go hiking, but the lure was irresistible. The forest shifted with them, drawing them onward, opening into patches of sunlight where wild blueberries clustered, then closing again into cool, echoing hallways of pine. Jungkook stopped often to take photos, moss with tiny stars of lichen, a web jeweled with droplets of dew now yet dried because of the shade. Jimin's profile when he thought Jungkook wasn't looking. "What?" Jimin asked, catching him. "Nothing," Jungkook said, dimples betraying him. "Just, you look good with green behind you." Jimin tried to scoff and failed. "Flirt. You love it," Jungkook smirked. "I do," Jimin shrugged, an affectionate smile on his face. No point in denying the obvious. They reached a bluff where the trees fell away and the world unfurled. Hills stacked like folded blankets, the sky a deepening blue. The wind tugged at their hair. Jimin stood at the edge, hands tucked into his jacket sleeves, while Jungkook came up behind him and slid an arm around his waist. The gesture was easy, practiced, like the way the wind moved through the trees. "Think we'll remember what this was like when we're back in Seoul, or will it all fade?" Jimin asked quietly. "I'm going to remember your hair doing that thing," Jungkook said into his ear, "and how you keep stealing my socks." Jimin snorted. "As if yours aren't softer." "They are," Jungkook admitted. His voice softened, and he wrapped his arms around Jimin's waist, hugging him from behind. "We'll remember," he whispered, tucking his chin over Jimin's shoulder. They lingered until the angle of the light made the world look honeyed and thin, then made their way back to camp. The sun hovered low, dipping towards the horizon, when Jungkook crouched to build the fire. He worked patiently, coaxing a nest of tinder into flame, feeding it twigs until it licked at thicker sticks. Jimin, perched on a log with a blanket over his shoulders, watched the sparks lift and vanish. "You look like a painting," Jimin said without thinking. Jungkook's head tipped. "A handsome one." "The handsomest," Jimin said, looking away and pretending to investigate the sky. Dinner was simple, pork skewers glossed with sesame oil and salt, and ramen bubbling in a dented pot over the fire. Jungkook claimed chef privileges, but Jimin kept leaning in to taste the broth. After the third quality check, Jungkook blocked him with a spoon. "If you're so hungry, help." "I am helping," Jimin said, nudging Jungkook's knee with his own. "I'm moral support." They ate cross-legged by the fire, humming in unison at the first mouthfuls like they couldn't hold back. The forest shifted into evening around them. Crickets tuned their instruments. A lone owl hooted a low note. When the pot scraped empty, Jungkook leaned back on his hands with a sigh. "Okay," he said. "Entertainment time." "Entertainment? Are you going to dance for me?" Jimin asked in a sultry voice, eyes dragging down Jungkook's muscular frame. Tempting, but not yet. Jungkook dug into his pack and produced a tiny speaker and a rubbery deck of waterproof cards. "Truth or dare, loser does dishes." "Bold," Jimin said, accepting the challenge. They played while the fire settled into a steady glow. The rules were loose. A question could be answered honestly or turned into a dare. That they were pre-made helped keep a bit of suspense for a couple who already knew each other so intimately. Jimin asked Jungkook to do his best squirrel impression. Jungkook scampered up a log with alarming agility and pantomimed, stuffing his cheeks. Jungkook dared Jimin to sing the chorus of Lie in a whisper 2 inches from his ear. Jimin leaned close and sang, breath warm, eyes amused when he saw Jungkook shiver. "My turn," Jungkook said, slightly wrecked and pretending not to be. "Truth. When did you first know you liked me?" Jimin paused to toss a twig into the fire and watch it flare. "You really want me to answer that on the second round? You already know anyhow." "Humor me," Jungkook said, earnest shining through his tease. "I never get bored of this story." "Fine." Jimin rolled his eyes before turning to watch the dancing flames. "You know, I thought you were cute from the first time I laid eyes on you, But the turning point was that late rehearsal when the power went out. Do you remember? God, everything in that early studio was dodgy. Everyone's phones were dead, and you started humming in the dark. I could only hear you and smell the dust. Then there was this warmth next to me. Then you held my hand. You said it was because you were scared. I wasn't. Jungkook laughed softly at the memory. Just an excuse to get closer to you. I know that now, Jimin grinned. But then, well, I was just happy to be close to you too. The fire crackled like it understood. Jungkook blinked at him, then curled one hand around the back of Jimin's neck for a second. A quiet thank you for his patience during those early years when he was still discovering who he was. Jimin coughed to break the sudden seriousness. Okay, hotshot. Dare. Do 10 push-ups. But sing the alphabet while you do it. You are a menace. Jungkook dropped into a plank and started. The letters broke into laughter near G when Jimin sat on his lower back like a smug cat. Cheater. Motivation. Jimin protested, dissolving into giggles as Jungkook powered through anyway, breath ragged, then collapsed dramatically in the pine needles. They moved on to charades, and then to a dance-off set to a playlist of acoustic covers and campfire classics. Jimin danced with theatrical campy flair, milking every turn. Jungkook countered with ridiculous footwork and wiggly shoulders that sent Jimin wheezing. At one point, Jimin looped a scarf around Jungkook's neck and drew him close in a mock tango. Jungkook's hand landed on the small of Jimin's back, sliding there by instinct. For a heartbeat, the joke stuttered into something hotter, steadier as their hips were pressed close. They separated with shaky smiles. Point Jimin, Jungkook said, clearing his throat. Obviously, Jimin smirked. They let the music fade and drifted into companionable chores, washing the pot in the creek, stringing the line for towels, checking the tent stakes. The forest had gone cobalt and silver. Their lantern carved a bright swathe in the dark and caught the eyeshine of a curious deer that stood and watched them for a long, unbothered moment before bounding away. Back by the fire, Jungkook rummaged through the food supplies, searching for something. Okay, Jungkook said after a while. Last act. He reached into the bag and produced a package of graham crackers, a bar of chocolate, and a bag of marshmallows. You didn't, Jimin said, delighted. I did, Jungkook said, entirely pleased with himself. Behold, the crown jewel of camping. It's not real camping without marshmallows. They assembled their skewers to toast the marshmallows. Jungkook showed off his perfect slow-rotate technique. Jimin adopted a more chaotic approach and immediately caught his marshmallow on fire. Help! Jimin yelped, waving it like a tiny comet. Stop! Stop! You're sprinkling sugar lava everywhere. Jungkook laughed, catching Jimin's wrist gently and blowing out the flame with exaggerated seriousness. He peeled back the blackened shell to reveal the molten center and, without thinking, offered it to Jimin. Jimin leaned forward and took it right off the stick with his mouth, eyes dancing, the string of sugar stretching for an absurdly long second before it snapped. You are impossible, Jungkook said, grinning helplessly but also completely mesmerized. They fell into a rhythm of roasting and building marshmallows. Warm square of chocolate, cloud of marshmallow, graham lid, the satisfying soft crackle of the first bite. Sticky fingers, sticky jokes. Jungkook got a streak of melted chocolate across his cheek somehow. Jimin, equal parts scandalized and delighted, wiped it off with his thumb and then, flustered by his own boldness, licked his thumb clean, sucking it deeply while holding Jungkook's gaze. Sweet, Jimin murmured, trying to sound casual and failing spectacularly. Jungkook's laugh came out a little rough. You can't just, he broke off, shook his head, and stabbed another marshmallow onto the skewer like it had personally offended him. I'm fine. It's fine, he announced to the forest. Sure, Jimin said, knowing his boyfriend was anything but. They quieted after that, not because the teasing had run dry, but because the night had pressed close. The fire had burned down to an embered glow, and the stars were out in riotous numbers. The air smelled like pine resin and smoke like something ancient. Jungkook lifted his skewer, eyes on the steady bloom of gold at the marshmallow's edge, and then, predictably, adorably, miscalculated. The softened square sagged, slid, and landed neatly on his lower lip, sticking like a sugary kiss. He went very still. Jimin's smile flashed, helpless. You're a mess. Jungkook, in a tone that pretended nonchalance and failed, asked, Want to help me out? The spark in his eyes leapt from him to Jimin like it had been waiting. Jimin's breath caught. He leaned in, slow enough that Jungkook could see his eyelashes lower and lift again. The sticky sweetness glistened at the corner of Jungkook's mouth. Jimin paused close enough to feel Jungkook's exhale, then, with deliberate care, licked the marshmallow from his lip. The forest hushed. The ember bed gave a soft, decisive pop. Heat unspooled in the space between them. Jimin's lips brushed his just barely. Sweet, he said again, voice not quite steady. Jungkook closed the fraction of distance left and kissed him. It was not frantic. It was the kind of kiss that said, We made a tent together, we found a heart-shaped rock, we laughed until our ribs hurt, and now we're here at the soft center of it. It's just the forest and us. The night and us. Us. Jungkook's hand found the back of Jimin's neck, warm, confident, guiding him closer. Jimin's fingers curled into Jungkook's shirt and then smoothed along his chest, anchoring there like he never planned to let go. The taste of sugar lingered, mingling with smoke and the cool edge of night. When they broke for breath, they barely moved, foreheads pressed together, noses brushing, both smiling like they'd stumbled into a secret and found it to be theirs all along. Maybe camping was the best idea I've ever had, Jimin murmured, dazed with happiness. Finally, Jungkook said, thumb brushing Jimin's bottom lip as if committing it to memory. Something you agree with me on? Don't push your luck. Never, Jungkook said, and tugged him in again. They settled back on the blanket, shoulders touching, the fire flattering their faces with gold. For a long while they didn't talk, just passed the skewer between them and watched the sparks lift and vanish. The world narrowed to the pool of warm light they shared. When the chill finally chased them to bed, they retreated to the tent. The nylon rustled as they crawled inside and zipped the world out. The small lantern clipped above them made a small galaxy on the ceiling. Jimin fluffed his pillow and promptly curled into Jungkook's side as if he'd been engineered for that exact purpose. Hey, Jungkook teased softly. This is a no-cuddling zone. Jimin made a scandalized sound. Excuse me. Just kidding, Jungkook said, wrapping his arms around him with obvious satisfaction. It's a mandatory cuddling zone. Better, Jimin said, smug. They lay there in an easy hush, listening to the wilderness radio. Owl, cricket, the far-off trickle of the creek, the occasional hush of wind sliding through the pines. Jimin traced idle patterns on Jungkook's arm, following in the dark the inked patterns he knew by heart. Jungkook pressed a kiss to Jimin's hair and felt Jimin smile against his shoulder. Tell me something true, Jimin said. Jungkook thought for a second. Sometimes I wake up before my alarm when we're traveling because I want 5 minutes to look at you when you're still asleep. Jimin's hand stilled. His reply was barely a whisper. That's unfair. You'll turn me into a lovesick mess. You already are, Jungkook said, tender enough to make it a promise and a joke at once. Fine, Jimin admitted. Your turn. Tell me something true, Jungkook echoed. Jimin sighed like he was surrendering a great secret. Sometimes I steal your hoodies because they smell like you, and because they're warm, but mostly because they smell like you. A pause. Also because they make me look small and adorable. Jungkook's laugh was low and delighted. You are small and adorable. Rude, Jimin said, elbowing him lightly, but accurate. They switched the last small light out and lay there in the darkest dark. The forest pulsed with life beyond the thin fabric walls, but inside was that particular silence that exists only when the person next to you is breathing in time with you. When Jungkook turned his head, Jimin met him halfway. Another kiss and another, soft, tasting of mint and sugar and maybe forever. The kisses deepened in slow, molten increments, but they stayed tethered to the sweetness of the evening, to the gentle gravity that had tugged them here. Heat unraveled lazily between them. Hands cupped faces. Thumbs skated along cheekbones and the edge of a jaw. Jungkook's breath hitched when Jimin's palm slid over his chest. Jimin smiled against his mouth when Jungkook's fingers found the curve of his waist and held. They parted only when they had to breathe, remaining with foreheads pressed together as if the posture had become home. Jimin's voice was wrecked and fond when he whispered, "Make love to me." Later, when the fire outside had surrendered to ash and the stars were nearly drowning in the idea of dawn, they talked sleepily about nothing and everything. Favorite constellations, the worst school lunches, dreams they'd whispered to no one. Jimin promised to persuade his mom to teach Jungkook how to make her kimchi stew. Jungkook swore to bring Jimin to the highest mountain in Korea and hold his hand at the summit while the world spun below them. They dozed and woke in the soft rhythm of people who know they have nowhere else to be but here. Morning arrived like a shy guest, first gray, then pink. The tent glowed gently. A bird they didn't know by name sang a precise, cheerful scale. Jimin blinked awake to find Jungkook's shoulder under his cheek and their hands caught together like they'd been stitched that way. "Hi," Jimin said, smiling into fabric. "Hi," Jungkook said, voice morning rough and dear. "You look smug." "I am," Jimin replied. "I have a very handsome boyfriend who made sure he satisfied me very thoroughly last night." Jungkook kissed his forehead as if that were a perfectly normal thing to say at dawn in the forest, which it had become. "Coffee, please," Jimin said, rolling reluctantly away. They unzipped the tent to a morning that smelled like sky after rain, even though it hadn't been in the forecast. Steam curled from the pot as water boiled. Jungkook stirred instant coffee while Jimin warmed his hands on the mug like a cat discovering a sunny spot. They ate granola out of the bag and compared notes on their dreams. After breakfast, they wandered back to the creek. In daylight, it looked fresher, newer, like someone had come the night to polish every stone. They ran cold water through their fingers, scrubbed the last of the marshmallow from the skewers, and promised the river they would come back someday. Back in the clearing, they broke camp. The tent collapsed into neat triangles. The sleeping bags rolled obediently. Jimin made exactly one scandalized noise when he couldn't find the heart-shaped rock, and then crowed when it surfaced in the side pocket where he'd put it, as if it had returned on its own out of loyalty. Before they left, they stood at the edge of the space where their fire had been and scattered the last of the cool ash. Jungkook took a final photo, Jimin in profile, sunlight in his hair, a row of pines behind him. Jimin took one too, Jungkook laughing, head back, a smear of soot high on his cheekbone like a badge of honor. "Ready?" Jungkook asked. "Do we have to be?" Jimin sighed and then smiled. "Yeah, let's go." They shouldered their packs and stepped back into the cathedral of trees. The forest gave them its farewell blessing in its shifting glitter of leaves. The trail bent the world around them into a long green string they followed hand in hand for a while, swinging their arms like kids. At the car, they tossed their packs into the trunk. Jungkook opened the passenger door for Jimin with a little bow. Jimin curtsied lavishly in return, earning another burst of Jungkook's musical laugh. As the engine hummed to life and the road shouldered them forward toward everything waiting, Jimin reached across the console and laced their fingers together. The pine smell clung to them. Smoke lingered in their hair. Sugar lived on their tongues, a memory that would surface every time either of them saw a bag of marshmallows in a grocery aisle. "Next time," Jungkook said, eyes on the narrow ribbon of asphalt, "we go for 2 nights. "And 3 bags of marshmallows," Jimin said. "And 4 blankets," Jungkook countered. "No, that's too much," Jimin objected. "I don't need a blanket when I have you." "Deal," Jungkook said, lifting their joined hands to kiss Jimin's knuckles at a stop sign. They drove on, sunlight collecting in the car like a bright, calm tide. The forest, receding in the rear view, knew what they knew, that some places take you in and send you out changed, sweeter at the edges, braver in the center. Beneath the pines, 2 men had toasted marshmallows and told truths, and found, in the quiet between the wind and stars, that home didn't have to be a place. Sometimes home could be a kiss that tasted of smoke and something bright, a kiss begun with a small disaster of melted marshmallow and finished with the kind of laughter that was only possible when you were certain you were loved. Home could be a blanket spread under a sky spangled with stars, or a hand finding yours without having to ask. Home was a person, and for Jimin and Jungkook, that person was each other.
Thank you so much for listening. I know the world is a hard place right now, and I really hope this story brought a bit of comfort to your day. If you enjoyed the story, please remember to like and subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll be the first to know when a new story is released. You can find the written version of this and all my stories on my Patreon for free at patreon.com/cjmoon. I love you, I purple you, sarangay.